We are going to look at Ezekiel chapter 37. We're going to look at verses 1 through 14 of Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 1 through 14, which says, "He then said to me, 'Mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost, and we are cut off completely. Therefore prophesy and say to them, Thus says the Lord, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from your graves, O my people, and I will bring you back to the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from your graves, O my people, and I'll put my spirit within you, and you shall live.'" What a question to ask, right? Mortal, can these bones live? And this is a question I would never want to be asked of me, right? Here you see a battlefield is kind of the image there of bones just strewn and left there to bodies to rot. It's really kind of a horrific vision that God is giving Ezekiel here. And to be asked, like, okay, mortal, can these bones be lived? I know in our kind of our self-righteousness, I say, well, of course, right? You're asking me, and you could do that, but I'd be afraid, like, my answer really, I don't know. Can they? Can they? Because I know I could pretend. I know we do this often with simpler things than bones being resurrected that God has commanded us to do, or has asked us to do, or has played before us and say, mortal, can you do these things? And we're like, oh, sure, but we don't do those. But here you have something like this. It's like this awesome task. And so I'll just kind of be honest, like, my answer is, I don't know. I mean, and at my worst, I would be more like to say, these bones, they're dry, right? They're dead. They're lifeless. They're parched. They're hopeless. They're powdering. They're decaying. Like, what? So no, the bones are dead. These bones are decayed. These bones will never live. And fortunately, Ezekiel, the prophet, is not like me, not like many other believers in God. Because the prophet Ezekiel has the wherewithal to at least say, oh, Lord, you know. The prophet Ezekiel doesn't say, like, I'm going to put this upon myself. I'm going to do and turn this question completely back around to God. The condition of the bones in question for God is to answer, not for us. And as humans, we're too close to the circumstance sometimes. We are, as humans, we're too close to the situation. As humans, we are too close to the reality of the dry bones. And we can't make a good evaluation of it. And so we can see these things from God's perspective. We can't know all the possibilities. So Ezekiel was a prophet of the exile. Just like Jeremiah, which we talked about last week. We looked at Jeremiah before him. He did his work under trying circumstances. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't like, okay, God gave me this ministry, and it's the perfect thing and the perfect flow, and I'm going to go preach. People are going to respond, and everything's going to be nice. We're going to create a new utopia. Wasn't the reality for Jeremiah. It wasn't the reality for Ezekiel, and it's not the reality for us either. That's why it's important for us to look at these prophets in the Old Testament, because I think sometimes we get kind of caught up. It's like when the perfect circumstance for us in ministry and church and life, then. But those things never happen. Those things are a figment of our imagination. There's never the perfect. Not everything always comes together for everything just now to flow easy and I'll just walk and reap the benefits of it all. These are all trying circumstances. And like Jeremiah's time, which is the same time as Ezekiel, kind of dealing with the same issues with Israel. They're trying times. Now, Jeremiah, to kind of go back to last week, Jeremiah stayed in Israel. We talked about the children of Israel being taken off to Babylonian captivity, and he's sending them his message. Jeremiah stayed in Israel and prophesied to the exiles far away from their homeland. And Ezekiel doesn't stay in Israel. Ezekiel goes with those who are in exile. And so he does his work in Babylon as Jeremiah is doing his work in Israel. And so his prophecies from a kind are on the spot reporting of this is what's happening. He's giving us insight into what the experience of the exile was like. And unlike Jeremiah, who is giving them these visions of hope, and that's what we looked at last week, like advising the exiles at a distance to blend into their new surroundings, to tell them to build houses, right, and to plant gardens, and to find jobs, and to marry and choose a wife, or take husbands and have children and raise them and celebrate the good and pray for the well-being of the people. And we talked about that as a church. That's what we're to do. We are to live, even though we are seen as exiles, we are to live within this community and seek out the well-being for this community. So that's what Jeremiah was the whole message last week. That's what Jeremiah was telling the people. In these terrible circumstances that you find yourself in, still live life and seek the best welfare from the community that you live in, that you find yourself living. And Ezekiel describes in his prophecies, in what we see, this picture of desolation. The exiles are far away. They're cut off. They feel that all hope has vanished. Their future is lost. They're good as dead. And for them, the dead carcasses of what they once were lies rotting in the desert sun. Isn't that vision? That's who they are. That's who we were. We were this great, mighty people of God, and now we're scattered like bones, rotting in the field of the battle, out in the desert, out in the valley, and from which the experience of the exile had sucked out any hope, sucked out the life, a return to some kind of healthy existence. Like, what is going to be next? It's hopeless. There's nothing good next that is coming up. And as Ezekiel looks on, and as Ezekiel sees the plight of his people, God gives him an explanation of what he's seeing. He says, "Mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel." And their bones are saying, they say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost, and we're cut off completely. Now, if you remember back to Jeremiah, you remember that we talked about the church being in exile. And we are the people of God who now find ourselves far away. We are cut off. We are out of step with much what is happening around the world. We are different. We're even sometimes out of sorts with elements within our own faith who have seemingly kind of given up completely on the path of following Jesus to hold on to power within our culture. And so there's a struggle, there's a tension there. Like, okay, we're exiles, we're different, we're Christians. Our culture has dramatically changed from what it used to be, where it's just not easy. Not everything like flows, and like we're kind of in this great Christian era of our culture. And we're exiles. And then we look around and say, like, well, not everyone's kind of following faithfully. Everyone's kind of going off in all these weird and bizarre directions. I can say there's a lot of weird, bizarre directions. Since I have teenagers, I try to keep up with the things that they're involved with and their social apps and stuff. And, I'm not one of these guys like, don't get on the social apps and whatnot. But just to see the religious Christian content on apps like TikTok, they're being fed all kinds of stuff. All kinds of stuff as Christians are going off in all kinds of directions, in doing all kinds of false teaching and things. And it's really interesting the time we live on how much everyone has such a platform to spew a lot of nonsense. That we're just right, that we're not even there, just like, here are the basic messages of Christianity, as it's getting muddled and muddled and muddled in so many voices and things. And we have to be aware of that we are really out of step with what is going on as people grab onto places of privilege and power within our society. And meanwhile, those of us who remain to wish to be faithful, we have been reduced to a pile of, seems like sometimes, of dry bones. Hopeless, discarded, unable to respond in any meaningful way to the new circumstances of our surroundings. Like, what do we do? What kind of ministries do we do? What do we say? What part of society do we work in and do? And sometimes we can feel very, very hopeless, very lost, very out of step. We're like, what is going on around us? And it's not a pretty picture. And it's not a hopeful existence. So what are we to do? What are we to do? I suppose that laying back and enjoying the warmth of the desert sun is not an option. It's not an option for us just to kick back and go, okay, we'll just kind of bask in a little bit of glory in Christ and just let things flow and go. Ezekiel is not allowed to leave the bones as they are. He's not given this vision, and Ezekiel's response is, okay, I'll just kick back and just, like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. He must prophesy to the bones. He's told to prophesy to the bones. He is to tell them that God will bring them back to life, that God will knit them together, that God will get them on their feet, that God will clothe them with muscle and skin, and God's going to put back breath in their lungs. And God will do it. God will make it happen. God will restore them when they can't possibly do it for themselves. And when he's done prophesying to the bones, Ezekiel's commanded to prophesy to the breath, God's Spirit blowing in from the four winds of the earth to reanimate the dry bones and transform them into living creatures once again. That's the only way that this is ever going to happen. Dry bones can't raise themselves. They need God to make it happen. And the good news for us is this. Those of us who find ourselves living in the valley of dry bones, God will make it happen. God will make it happen. It depends on us. We don't have to do everything ourselves. In fact, we can't do everything ourselves. If it depends on us, it's not going to happen. If we kind of constantly say, like, what can I do? What is it the thing I need to do? How do I need to solve this? How do I need to fix this? How do I need, we're constantly like, it's all on my ability, and it's all on me, and it's on my shoulders, and it's my, if we take that approach, we're not going to be able to do it. We're not going to be able to do it because it's not going to happen. But if we depend on God, it can. And we are about to again remember that God has entered our world as we think about Christmas and the celebration of the advent of Christ, of God coming into the world as flesh, as human, to show us that perfect reflection of God and the divine and who God really is and what God is really about, and showing us that God has taken on flesh and blood, that God has become a human being with bones and sinews and muscle and skin and flesh and spirit all put together just right so that we might see the power of God and bring good news to those who live in exile, to lift those up who have fallen, to mend those who are broken, to restore hope to the hopeless, and to bring new life to those who have given up, to raise the dead and to reactivate those dry bones, to make them live. God will restore God's people. God will restore those who seek after him. And so this is something that we need to remember as we go into this Christmas season. as we reflect and we remember that God came in flesh and bone, not to give us comfort, right? Not to, it's like here, now we could sit here and spend an hour of time with him or something. But so that he can restore his creation. That he can bring the things that are dying and rotting and are in the dark and bring those things to life and into the light and to restore them. Whether it be our church, whether it be our family, whether it be our neighborhood, our community, our state, right, our country, the world around, there are areas that need to be restored. And God is saying through Ezekiel to the people of his time and to us today, rely on him to restore. Rely on him to bring things back to life. And then if you're relying on him, then when you speak to those things that are dead, you're like, I know this is not me. This is not all my responsibility. These are God's responsibility. And what I'm doing here is Ezekiel's not told to condemn. He's told to speak life into, right? He's told to say, here are the promises that are coming. I think sometimes we feel like we need to pick out and pull apart and tear apart and just like, here's all the wrong thing. But rather, we're supposed to like speak what is to be restored. Like, this thing is not right. Whatever those situations are, whatever those relationships are, they're not right. And so now I need to speak life into it. I need to speak like, here are the promises of God. Here are the things that God has said that will restore and bring back. And that's where we put our hope in. And that's what we look forward to when we coming towards Christmas and the advent of Christ. That he's bringing these things about, that he can reactivate, that he can restore, that he can raise the dead in the metaphor of our culture, in the metaphor of broken relationships, in that metaphor of all those things that God can bring this all about, because it's been demonstrated through his Son. He came, he lived, he showed us God. He showed us the right way humanity is to live and respond both to God and to fellow human beings. And showed what that looked like when he gave that perfect sacrifice for his creation. But not saying dead, but being raised 3 days later. So he's shown he has this power over death to restore and to renew and to bring back whole again. And so as we fret, as we worry, as we say things are not right, and we rely and we put our trust in God. And he says, see the dry bones, right? Preach them. And say, okay, what are you going to do? Right? And I will follow. Right, the lesson is yours as you go through this week, and remember, dry bones and restoration, and it's up to God. And it's been demonstrated through